Hey all, very happy today to have our very own Brent Caldwell on the show today. Brent, how are you doing today?
Great, thanks. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason why I'm so excited about having Brent on the show is that Brent is our very own inside sales manager. So if you've ever considered inside sales, I brought him on the show so that he can talk a little bit about his professional story and answer some questions like that. Um, Do you hear any sound problems right now, Brent, or is it just me?
Just during that intro there was some lag. That's the first I've heard of it though. So, and
Okay,
you're fine, right?
okay, let's just keep powering through them. Yeah, so I'd love to hear a little bit about your professional story. So specifically, I think that inside sales is a really interesting position to be in. Um, what drew you first to the inside sales role when you were an individual contributor? And what eventually led you to inside sales management? Can you walk me through just some sort of the own internal decision making that you were doing and what sort of steps you went through?
Sure. Yeah, I think I can give you some idea. I'd say it's really about 20 years ago for me, and it was real simple. Um, Back for me, when I took my first job in software as an inside sales rep, it was for a small company selling software tools to developers. And we didn't have outside sales reps. This is a small company. I hired salespeople, not inside sales versus outside sales. And when you're in a young company in a startup, it's really important for you to follow up with people. The leads that you do have, find new leads, kind of build the business. And so, really, we didn't have outside salespeople. I was the salesperson for my territory. I did most of my work via email and telephone, traveled really for a small company when I needed to. um, that was 20 years ago. 10 years ago I worked for a company that was more IT infrastructure as management, called Puppet. And once again, brand new people. I was salesperson number 3. Didn't have a concept of inside versus outside. I'm a salesperson, and here's your phone, here's your computer, and get it done. So
Yeah,
I think that's the first thing I like to say about an inside sales rep is we're just salespeople. We do not travel as much as the outside salespeople. Not going to have all of the sharpened presentation skills, because it's a lot more about picking up the telephone, using the email, and reaching out to a lot of people. But the first 2 companies that I started with, that's what we had. That's what we did. That until we built enough of a platform of clients, then we hired outside people on top of it. At Puppet, excuse me, I'm sorry, at GitLab, I've been here 3.5 years now. It was exactly flipped. They had no concept of inside sales at all. Everybody was an outside sales rep that was in enterprise. But when we started, Paul Almeida and I, the public sector team, that's one thing we had to have as an inside sales rep, because there's a lot of phone calls, there's a lot of transactions, you're dealing with a lot of resellers. So you're not just putting one quote out to a client, you're putting 4 or 5 or 6 quotes out to multiple resellers for one client. So there's a lot of meticulous, busy work that needs to be done. So when we built the public sector team, we said we have to have inside sales. So I came here with Paul Almeida, and we built out this team. And up till May of this year, we only had inside sales on the public sector team at GitLab.
yeah. I think that that's really interesting. So when I've heard of inside sales, sometimes I've heard the term used a little bit differently. I hope that you can help me walk through it. So a lot of times in companies, they have like SMB and commercial, and then those are the people that are working the smaller deals. A lot of times they're comped less than the enterprise and the field salespeople. But they're fundamentally still closers, right? So that's one way in which you have inside salespeople. They just don't travel. That's why they're called inside. And then the other thing that I have is this concept. I've also heard of it called as like a teamed inside sales rep, where we have a bunch of outside salespeople. They're getting paid, OT north of 200. And so you have some inside salespeople that primarily function to do some of the administration and handle renewals and some of the smaller tasks. And I typically hear of these people called teamed inside salespeople. So in terms of GitLab, is that what you've seen to an industry? And uh, in my understanding, then the team that we have here would fall under a teamed inside sales role because we still have SMB and commercial sales teams. Is that correct?
Um, kind of. I'm not sure. Let me put it to you a different way. So team inside sales rep just sounds to me like there's a bunch of strategic account leaders and we have a small pool of inside sales rep, and you might be closing an order for one territory or another territory, but you're focused on closing some orders and doing renewals and that kind of stuff, which yes, that is part of the inside sales team's job. However, I think to be a full inside sales rep, really it's a divide and conquer. For example, in public sector, we have 2 or 3 strategic account leaders to 1 inside sales rep. So it's not just processing orders, it's you go out and handle the purchasing people while the strategic account leader goes on site and sells the CIO. You're
Gotcha.
actually working in conjunction with each other. And if the ratio, the inside to outside, is correct, you've got the inside team member on your meeting every week talking strategically about which ones you're going to call, which ones they're going to call. They're contributing to the reports. So that's where you get into the more divide and conquer. So you could say it's a team because we don't have a 1-to-1 ratio here. But if the ratio is small enough, the inside sales rep should be an integral part of each team, not just processing orders and renewals for a bunch of people. So
Yeah,
that
thanks.
would be the distinction I would make.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, thanks for clarifying that for me. I think that we just started diving in, but I'd love to hear a little bit more. So we talked a little bit about the responsibilities, but can you walk me through like a traditional week of one of the people on your team? So it's like, what are the things that they're doing? What are the things that they care about? What are their objectives? What are their milestones? Yeah, I'd just love to hear what a traditional week is like as someone on your team.
Sure. I think the number one thing that I look for a good inside sales rep is organizational skills. Like, how do you know you're supposed to call somebody back on next Tuesday, right? Do you put something on your calendar? But you've got hundreds of clients, potentially thousands of people that you talk to. Really? You're going to put those on your calendar? So I have used Salesforce in my career, and whatever CRM you use, we use Salesforce here. Using the CRM to build your call list, I think, is very important. So we use open activities. So if you're following up on an order, you set an open activity and you set it, you're supposed to call the person next Tuesday. When you open your Salesforce, you will see a list of all of your activities in chronological order that pop up on your homepage. So what's your week look like? You wake up in the morning, you see your 10, 15 people that you have to get a hold of on Monday. Down the list, you can see the people you have to get on Tuesday. Well, what happens? You're going to try to call a bunch of these people on Monday, but 5 people from last week called you, right? So you're not going to get to everyone on your list. You got to go through on the people that you didn't reach today and then put them out. I'll put one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday, one on Thursday, and fold them into this list. So if you go about this organizationally, not only do you build your own call list and you know exactly who you're supposed to call, email, close this week, but as you grow, as you go into another role, as we split territories because we're successful, the person coming behind you inherits that activity list. They don't have to go through the whole database and figure out who the heck am I supposed to call, right? So that is, I think, a very important part of what you have to do. You have to be organized. You can't take for granted you're going to remember to call someone. We're going to document it. And then you live by your call list.
Gotcha. So if just to make sure that I understand correctly, The whole goal is to have everything in Salesforce, and then Salesforce should be your source of truth, should organize all of your tasks. And then someone in the inside sales team would basically log into Salesforce and have a very clear understanding of what the milestones and objectives are for that week.
Exactly. Now, there's a lot of complexity to it. You're going to go to the meetings with your strategic account leader, who's going to ask you to do some prospecting to a certain company, right? There are times we do workshops and webinars, and sometimes the ISRs are working with our marketing team to set those up and help run them. So while you're focused on your call list and who you need to call to close these orders, then a lot of other things happen to help build the territory. And the ISR is kind of in the middle, helping organize and make sure the ball doesn't get dropped on a lot of it.
Gotcha. Excuse me. So if the Salesforce list, this is like my task list because inside sales rep, what determines what actually makes it into that list? Is it process or do I create it? Like, I'm just wondering, like, what percentage of the things in there do I create, like taking initiative and like I see an opportunity or something, and then what percent of it is like our sales process, where it's just sort of like we just had this call, therefore this thing's created, and now I have to follow up, blah blah, in like 48 hours or something like that.
Well, I mean, I would have to answer that question 100% is self-motivated, meaning ultimately no one's looking over your shoulder. You've got to manage your territory. And if you don't manage it correctly, you're not going to hit the numbers. So to answer that question, you've got 6 people from an AWS event 6 months ago that you tried to reach out to and they didn't. So you got those 6 people that are popping up on your list again. Would you call them before the person who we're saying is going to close an order at the end of October? Probably not. I'm probably going to start with, we are committed to closing this order in October. That's number one. Okay. One step behind that is those people can't order until the quotes are out. If it's October 14th and I'm saying I'm committed to closing it October 31st and I don't have an accurate quote out, I'm in trouble. You better have
Yeah,
that up on your priority list. Then there's the AWS people from 3 months ago. You'd prioritize them lower. So it's 100% the ISR saying, oops, I better set a task for this because I know this person told me to call them back in 2 weeks.
yeah,
And you don't think about it for 2 weeks. It just pops up on your list 2 weeks from now, and you're like, oh, yeah, I got to call that person again.
yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned that you look for in is organizational skills. What other things do you look for? It sounds like time management and having a sense of priorities and self-motivation are important, but that's just me reading in between the lines. What are some of the things from your perspective that you look for in a new hire?
Um, well, so I mean, there's experience things. So you can see in the job description, we're asking like 5 years of experience. Why? We have so few inside sales reps. We can afford to get people with that much experience. I mean, honestly, I haven't had problems hiring inside sales rep for public sector because a lot of our strategic account leaders have worked with good inside sales reps. So I've got a bunch of referrals. Now we don't always have that in every case, but if you don't have 5 years as an ISR, then what I have to start doing is looking at, okay, what do you have? Like, for example, as we've ramped up people in the enterprise side, looking for people who have been extremely successful SDRs that know GitLab, know the story, right? Are used to talking to people. That to me, I can use in lieu of some ISR experience. I can train you about call tasks and organizational skills. If I don't have to train you everything there is to do about GitLab in the story, if that
Yeah,
makes sense. So one or the other. So normally, if you're from outside, I'd be looking for 5 years of experience as an ISR. That's not a high ask. From inside, I would use some of that as internal GitLab experience in lieu of that.
gotcha. So from someone in my organization, it seems like the things that they could do to set themselves apart is to be really great at the product, to sound really great in the phone, really great people skills. Gotcha. Thanks for the clarification there.
I would add,
So
I would just add to that. Look, so there's those things, the things that you mentioned, you're a good team player, all of that kind of thing. And then you throw the organizational skills. That's where I think the SDR team really is going to need to make that pivot. Do you know how to, get the quotes out? Do you know how to organize your day? There's a lot of people to call. Do you know how to prioritize those? So getting into the data, understanding the data, getting the organizational skills up so we're not dropping the ball on top of all of the other knowledge and attitude and motivation stuff.
gotcha. Thank you. So for someone from the SDR organization or someone starting out who's thinking about these things and thinks that it's probably a good fit, how would someone demonstrate organizational skills to you? I'm just curious. So is it just like an interview process, or I'm just curious as to, but how, like, like, so for instance, in an interview, I could say like, hey, I'm hardworking, right? But so does everyone else. So like, how would someone demonstrate and come up with a track record for having good organizational skills so that they're really prepared for your team and role?
So I'm a stickler for using Salesforce to prove that, because that's where we live. That's what the company has decided is our CRM. And again, as I mentioned, it becomes an artifact. If I move on, if I move up, if we split, I've done work that the people coming behind me are going to benefit from.
Gotcha.
So so really what I would want to see in an interview is, when I'm talking to people, how do you manage your day? Show me. Well, I use outreach, and then, when people reach back to me, I answer them, right? Or do you say, no, here's how I interview, here's how I set up my day, here's how I think about it. How do I know I got through to these people? Well, I use this checklist, right? And so if it's not Salesforce, if it's outreach or Google Calendar, or I write sticky notes all over my screen, then fine, I can look at that and I can say, okay, you understand some organizational, but we have a CRM. Why would you not use this? Here's how you could use it. So trying to determine, does the person have the understanding of managing an account, the big picture of who do we need to talk to, when do we need to talk to them, after they purchase, what do we need to do, that kind of stuff. So I could get that by asking, how do you do it now, and get the sense of whether somebody's organized. Like, if you can't
Gotcha.
answer the question, how do you know I'm supposed to call Christopher next Thursday? How do you do that? What do you do?
Yeah.
And from getting that information, I can tell, okay, but what about this? What about that? What if you leave? So those are the kinds of things that I would like to see. Even if you're an SDR, you've got to organize your call list. You got to organize your day. You got to know when to follow up with someone. How do you do that now?
Yeah.
The more streamlined and repeatable your process, the more chance you're going to have to understand and succeed at being an ISR.
Gotcha. Thanks for explaining that. Um, I'm curious to hear about some of the complexity that's involved in the ISR role. So I guess, like, let me give an example of this. So it's like, I remember when I was in doing field sales, the complexity was that you tried to, you're going to fly out to Austin, Texas. You're going to try to get as many customer meetings as possible, but then what ends up happening is a certain number of them cancel. One of them is late. And it's just sort of like, it's this like ongoing organic thing, and you have to figure out priorities in a very like ever-changing schedule and landscape. So that was difficult for me when I was in hybrid sales. I'm glad that the salespeople that I was serving and tied to, they would generally be responsible for figuring out a lot of that stuff. I'm curious as to, like, what would you say are some of the hardest things that about like serving in inside sales? Like, so for instance, yeah, so it's just sort of like, what are some of the hardest things about the role?
Um, I think the hardest thing is it's super busy, and it's
Yeah.
constantly busy. If you're not closing orders and getting quotes out and dealing with purchasing people and figuring things like, okay, we want to upgrade to Ultimate and add 50 licenses. Some of the sales operations stuff really takes a lot of attention to detail. Um, so I'm sorry, I feel like I lost my train. Repeat that, just your last, the last point. I'm sorry. I feel like I
I was
was
just
me.
curious as to what are some of the hardest things about being in inside sales? You were saying that attention to detail and just like the amount of work is really difficult.
Right, right. So, and because you've got that, and if you're not busy, you're not selling anything. It's really hard to say, okay, I know what my money is going to be like. I've got this call, I've got this call, we get this call. But you've got all the stuff that you did last week. And that person you
Yeah,
called last week that didn't answer you is going to answer you back this week. Now, all of this sudden, you've got to get that quote out if you want to have this in October. So prioritizing your time, knowing what is the best use of my time right now, and being able to put things off that are lower priority, not forever and not forget about them, but in a way that you can do right. And then when you have multiple strategic account leaders like you were talking about, guess who they call when they need help? Hey, Joe Smith at this company just stood me up. Who else can I see? Right? You've got somebody in base, in front of the database, in a telephone that can help coordinate stuff like that. So there's a lot of distraction that's important, that you have to stop what you're doing and you have to focus on that and crush it. Then you have to be able to get right back into what you were doing without missing a beat. That's the toughest part.
gotcha. Thanks for explaining that to me. Um, I'm curious so one of the things that you mentioned was the fact that they do have a quota. I'm curious as to how the comp structure works for inside sales. Is it like 80/20, and is it tied to the sales that you support, or like how does that work?
Yeah, a great question, and welcome to sales. So this is a sales position. It's 50/50
Hmm,
base, 50% commission. You want a good question for people who want to know whether they want to be in sales or not? Live with 50% of your paycheck being not guaranteed. Okay. If you don't have that mindset that you can go out and that you're at the right company and by your effort you can hit those numbers, you're on the wrong business. Okay. So there's no 80/20. It's 50/50. This is a
hmm.
sales role. And every sales role I've ever had has always been 50/50. If you can't, put up those numbers and succeed, you're not going to make your OTE. So I think that's actually a huge hurdle for someone that wants to be in sales. Um,
Where does your number come from? So is it just sort of like, if over here I'm an inside sales rep, I support three sales, so like my quota is those three quotas combined together, or how does that work?
Correct. That's right.
Okay.
Your whole number is everybody you're supporting, and either we make it as a team or we don't make it as a team. Now, in that scenario, you've got three sales. Chances are not all three are going to make their number, right? One's going to be a little bit low, one's going to be a bit high, one's going to be on target, and then you're okay. But yes, you roll up to all of your strategic account leaders. That is how you're comped. If the team makes it, you make it, and if you don't, you don't. And so in that way, the company is double comp. There is no, if it's 50K and below, the ISR get comped, and if it's 50K and above, Sal gets comped. Both team members are comped on it. And so yes, the ISR owns all of their sales number put together.
Do you all have the same accelerator structure as the rest of sales, or is it different for your team?
It's the same
It's the
accelerator.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, obviously, the commission rates and stuff vary between everybody, right?
Yeah.
So it's different, but it's the same thing where if you're above 100 to 110%, you get X amount of Alex accelerator. Yeah, it's a sales comp plan.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, yeah, I think that we went over some of the other questions. I'm actually curious as to, I think this is a good one. So, like, if I were hiring some salespeople, we talked about some of the skills that were involved. So, good organizational skills, able to manage time well, prioritize. Um, I think that one of the things that is really interesting and a great question, I loved hearing the answers to this, is so sort of like, what are the types of, what are some of the things that you look for in the people themselves, not just like from a skills perspective, but like, I'll just give you an example. traditionally, like when I talk to sales managers, I ask them, hey, when you're recruiting and hiring, what are the things that you look for? And they look for, in some order, those say competitiveness, those say self-determination. They have to be able to go through adversity. They have to be able to persist when people aren't picking up the phone. They have to say, they'll say something like, they have to have like a strong sense of drive, good communication skills, and so on and so forth. So I'm curious for specifically for your role. I think that, yeah, so what are some of the things just like from a personality point of view that you look for?
Well, I think you need a high degree of self-confidence. You need to feel confident that you're going to be able to reach out. You don't have to have all the answers as a salesperson. You have to know where the answers are. You can get
Mhm.
on a conversation with somebody and you can have the confidence that you can help them, that you want to help solve their problem, right? So that's actually two things. One is just having your own self-confidence, and two is having the right attitude. We're not trying to sell people things they don't want. I don't know about every salesperson, but for me, that's highly motivated. I wouldn't be a good salesperson if I feel like you didn't need what I was trying to sell. One of the things that gets me up in the morning is I like hearing people's stories. I like hearing their problems. I like being able to translate our solution to their problems. And if it's a fit, then I enjoy helping the client that way. And I think so you need self-motivation, but you also need some perspective on, what you're trying to achieve. You've got to want to work with people. You've got to want to help people. You got to want to pick up the phone. You have to want to do it. It'd be really easy to not, and you're never going to get all of the activities done that is necessary, and you're never going to hit the crazy numbers we have to hit if you're sitting back waiting for people to call you back. You put out a phone call. If you need to leave a message, great. Often I follow that up with an email. Then I put them out on my call list and I go to the next person. Dealing with multiple people, juggling, getting multiple balls up in the air, and then being able to close in on them. That's all really important. So self-motivation, and I think a good attitude about why you want to be a salesperson. I think that helps you get up in the morning. And then, of course, as I said before, the organizational skills. If you don't have them, you can't succeed. It's too busy.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Cool. Well, thank you for explaining the role to me and hearing a little bit about your story. For those in the audience that are thinking about inside sales, hope this was helpful for you. And thank you, Brent, for your time. Thanks for joining the podcast today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.